Hello, I am Professor Kino, and welcome to my Office of Cinematic Antiquity. Today we will be continuing my series Second Look Celluloid, where I look at films that I believe were either overlooked or harshly judged at their time of release. Today's film is... The name Mortal Engines shouldn't be foreign for film aficionados, but not because it's the name of a movie, because it's the name of one of the biggest box office bombs of 2018, and that's a rough label, especially for a film that branded itself as being from the visionary filmmakers of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And this wasn't even a tabloid spin, the film tanked. It had a $100 million budget, so say $200 million including advertising and all that, and only took in $83 million worldwide over the course of its theater run. There has been a lot of talk about why this happened, and experts, as well as self-proclaimed experts, have concluded that it was a mix of poor critical reception, its 26% on Rotten Tomatoes definitely didn't do it any favors, in addition to needing to compete with Aquaman, Mary Poppins Returns, Bumblebee, and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. And I'd concur with this. So long story short, when Mortal Engines released, critics didn't like it much, and audience members, the small amount that actually saw it during the packed holiday season, were pretty lukewarm as well. And since I was not one of the few who saw it in theaters, I only just got around to seeing it. So do I think it's as bad as everyone keeps saying? Stay tuned to find out. Premise. A few hundred years after the apocalypse, civilization has reformed itself into a steampunk-esque world where cities are mobile. While most of them, and the people that reside on them, are focused on simple trade and survival, larger predator cities, such as London, seek to consume the small ones to feed their engines. However, when the young woman Hester Shaw attempts to assassinate the powerful Londoner Thaddeus Valentine, the whole world gets even more complicated as hidden agendas reveal themselves, new enemies emerge, and the fabric of the post-apocalyptic hierarchy threatens to crumble. Writing. As you can tell by the premise, this film is busy. It's a big ol' steampunk epic through and through. And while it is great that something like this even exists, steampunk has been a genre relegated to books and cosplay conventions, it does have faults. Although not as many as its Rotten Tomatoes score of 26% would have you believe. So let me start off with the good. First, the world building. The post-apocalyptic Earth in this film is really well crafted. Every aspect, the architecture, weapons, clothes, technology, etc., seems meticulously thought out. And while sometimes there are things mentioned that aren't ever explained, such as the events of the Nomad Wars or what the Lazarus Brigade is, for instance, their presence in the film, despite being tiny, feel like small parts of a massive world with its own history and politics and economy, and exploring it all is really fun. Additionally, some of the characters that reside in this world are really intriguing, such as Anna Fang, the badass spy/sky captain, and Shrike, the nigh-indestructible ancient robotic soldier. They fit right into this cool and imaginative world to make the whole experience of it all even more entertaining. But unfortunately, that ends the good of this film's writing. Next up, the mediocre, i.e. the general feel of the story. While it does have some unique ideas, and of course a unique setting, the story's progression feels like something we've seen before. For instance, our two main characters start off disliking each other, but fall in love near the end. At one point, our characters are in a life-threatening situation, and are then saved at the last minute by someone new who then pushes the story forward. The main villain has a personal connection to our lead protagonist, and stuff like this, etc. Mortal Engines is full of the classic teen young adult fantasy adventure elements that are commonplace in the genre. It's a little Star Wars, a little Hunger Games, a little Lord of the Rings, etc. But while its rehashing of old plots is not bad at all, it does make the film a little predictable and at times dry. However, what is kinda bad is the pacing of the story. Despite the film clocking in at a whopping 2 hours and 10 minutes, it isn't nearly enough time to tell the story it's trying to tell. A lot is glossed over, and the film feels like the plot of one season of a television show crammed down into 130 minutes. After the first actually really tight 20 minutes or so, the film devolves into big event after big event without the little moments in between that help to give the big events gravitas. Yes, there are some slower character-driven moments, but not nearly enough to make the film feel impactful. There's just way too much happening with way too many side stories to make us care passionately about any one of them. They are slightly engaging, but it's difficult to get invested. I think if the film just cut out maybe one of its many stories and gave its screen time to all the other stories, it would have smoothed things out tremendously. My personal vote would be to remove the story of Thaddeus Valentine's daughter Catherine. It felt fully unnecessary because all the revelations that she comes to over its runtime we already know as an audience. Maybe she was supposed to play a bigger role in a future film, seeing as how this was supposed to start a franchise, but Catherine just feels like wasted space here. But all this being said, I guess one plus of the rushed narrative is that the story here is self-contained, and all the major plot threads do get resolved. So at least this film will be satisfying enough for its fans, since it doesn't need its planned sequels, which is good because the chances of them being made are almost zero. So, Mortal Engines is a gorgeous film with an imaginative world and interesting characters that is unfortunately let down by a seen-it-before unfocused plot with too many side stories. Acting. A bit of a mixed bag. There seems to be two varying levels of acting on display. One level is acting reminiscent of a young adult fantasy adventure film, i.e. acting straight out of the Hunger Games, Maze Runner, or Divergent films, and most of these are the younger actors in Mortal Engines. Hera Hilmer as Hester Shaw, Ronan Rafferty as Beavis Pond, Leela George as Catherine Valentine, etc. None of them give a bad performance, they just feel like they're new to working on a big budget film. Think Daisy Ridley's performance in The Force Awakens. Good, just a little novice. Then the other level of acting is reminiscent of a reputable high-quality fantasy adventure, think The Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones. And this is the performance that Hugo Weaving gives as Thaddeus Valentine. He brings his A-game and gives the character a lot of depth, despite not having too much to work with. I loved him in every scene he was in. And this also goes for Stephen Lang as Shrike, the nigh-indestructible robot. He is captivating and a scene stealer. And then there were a few actors who seemed to be in between these two levels, less novice feeling than your typical YA actor, but not as amazing as Weaving or Lang. For example, Ji-Hae Kim as Anna Fang, she was kinda like a badass mix of Aragorn and Han Solo, but in an airship. I liked her a lot as well, despite her, like Weaving's Valentine, not getting too much to work with. And on par with Kim is Robert Sheehan, who fulfills the role of the underdog protagonist Tom Natsworthy. He is nowhere near as good as Weaving, but he brings a lot to the role. Then again, maybe I just liked him a lot because of how much I like Sheehan as Klaus and Netflix's The Umbrella Academy, so all in all, solid performances, but with some that are far better than others. Costumes, hair, and makeup. As I mentioned before, this film has stellar world building in it, and that does not stop at the costumes, hair, and makeup. They are great. Each character is unique and has a cool looking outfit that matches their personality and backstory. And there is a lot of variety here, from fancy Victorian clothes with nice makeup, to grungy mechanic clothes with grease smudges, to badass rebel clothes with stylish makeup, to undead robots, etc. There was even one guy who had a jacket made out of white buttons that was really fascinating. However, I won't break down each individual look because my conclusion for each of them will be the same. Excellently imagined and created. I love them. Set design. Excellent as well. The production design of this film is stupendous. From the broad strokes down to the minutiae, the sets here are very attractive. Whether they be vast, detailed cities, dank engine rooms, pristine upper-class homes, or filthy slave trading posts, the sets are well thought out and well put together. Choreography. The action in this film isn't necessarily amazing, but it's fine. While the first action scene, one that involves a city-on-city chase, is unique and exciting, most everything else is merely solid. It's not too choppy, but also not too unique. So while you have some cool scenes like the introduction of Anna Fang, who does kick ass, and pretty much every action scene with Shrike, who is terrifyingly cool, the action scenes also feel a little by the numbers. While there are flashes of creativity and wonderment on display, the action as a whole is merely good. Cinematography. There are a lot of jaw-dropping shots in this film, particularly its establishing shots. For instance, the first grand rotation around London is fantastic. It was one of the moments of the film that I felt my eyes glued to the screen. It was beautiful. Similarly, the framing of the action is usually handled well. While it was never fantastic, it was never really choppy. It actually felt fluid to mostly great effect. Anna Fang's first fight scene again comes to mind. It was really well done, so in general the cinematography here was really good. Editing. For the most part, the editing is fine, nothing special. However, since there are so many plot threads in the film, the transitions between them are not always great. One example was when Anna Fang's and Catherine Valentine's stories were kinda edited together. The thing is, there was no real connection between them during these moments. It just felt sloppy and strange to experience both stories in tandem, and strange editing like this happened periodically, a symptom of a cluttered and fast-paced plot. CGI. For the most part, stellar. After just watching this film for a few minutes, I understood where the budget had gone. There was just so much CGI on display here, but it all looks really nice. While there can occasionally be an obvious green screen, the CGI in general blended really well with what was there. And this also goes for Shrike, who was full-on CGI. While for the most part he looks amazing with his robotic limbs and shining green eyes, once in a while he does feel obviously computer-generated. Definitely not enough to take you out of the film, but noticeable. So all in all, the film is a beautiful CGI feast with a few teeny tiny bumps in the road. Music. It's your basic grandiose adventure film music, and that's because it's by probably the most notable adventure composer of late, Junkie XL. He has done the soundtracks for Batman v Superman, Mad Max Fury Road, Alita Battle Angel, Tomb Raider, etc. So it has exciting songs for the fun scenes, intense songs for the action scenes, foreboding songs for the villainous scenes, etc., all with a unique enough twist on them to make it fit with the film's aesthetic and sound solid. But it is still your typical Junkie XL soundtrack, so good but nothing new. Direction. Because of the advertising of this film, it would be easy to think that Peter Jackson directed it. I mean, his name was on all the posters and in the trailers. But he was actually just a screenwriter and producer. Christian Rivers directed this one, and it was actually his first solo big-budget film. Before this, he was primarily a storyboard artist, visual effects director / supervisor, etc. on films like The Lord of the Rings, King Kong, and The Hobbit. And Mortal Engines does look great. That's what Rivers does. He makes cool looking stuff. So this film of course shines regarding its production design, sets, costumes, makeup, world building, CGI, etc. However, I also feel like Rivers decided to follow the screenplay by Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh, and Philippa Boyens too directly. It's like he didn't want to take anything out of it and clean it up. So unfortunately the film suffers. And the result is a gorgeous looking film with an imaginative and well-realized world that has a cluttered and unfocused story at its core. My enjoyment. I will admit that I did have fun with Mortal Engines. I'm a sucker for spectacle, and this film has droves of it. I've always loved being able to get lost in new worlds, which is why I love films like The Lord of the Rings, Mad Max Fury Road, Alita Battle Angel, and the like. The imagination on display feeds me mentally. I love it. But I also must admit that there were moments in Mortal Engines that dragged a little and felt unnecessary. Did it ruin the movie for me? No, I always knew what was going on, but sometimes only felt moderately engrossed in the actual story. So do I think it's amazing? Definitely not. Is it a 26% on Rotten Tomatoes bad? Also definitely not. It's a fine, passable steampunk adventure, and I enjoyed it. Recommendations. This film is for anyone who likes the following: visual spectacle, imagination, a well-realized fantasy world, and a dense and expansive lore. This film excels in these categories. It's a cool movie. However, if a shaky plot that speeds along, glosses over details, is overall non-impactful, and feels a little unfocused as a deal-breaker, then Mortal Engines won't be your jam. It's just a movie that succeeds in some respects and trips over itself in others. Thanks for watching. I hope you liked it. If you did, leave a like. If you want to add anything, feel free to comment. If you want to see more, please subscribe. I am Professor Kino, and I look forward to our next discussion.